will be item 7A, where it's the small cell telecommunications facilities. And it's a discussion and approval of a master license agreement form for the non-exclusive installation of small cell telecommunications facilities and use of city street light poles in the public right-of-way. So we have several presenters this evening. The presentation will be provided by Public Works Director Hans Larson. And to support the council with questions and discussions, we will have Dalit Kishnani, who is the Public Works Principal Civil Engineer, Bronwyn Lacey, who is the Senior Deputy City Attorney, David Witkowski with Joint Venture Silicon Valley, who is Executive Director of the Civic Technology Initiatives. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mayor May, members of the council. The purpose of this agenda item is to seek your direction on the proposed installation of small cell telecommunication facilities on city street light poles. I'll be providing the overview presentation, and as the mayor just introduced, I'm joined by a team of experts. Bronwyn addressing kind of the legal. Philip is our Public Works Manager for Private Development and Utilities, and we're really pleased to have David Witkowski from Joint Venture Silicon Valley. He's a subject matter expert on this topic, and he serves as the Executive Director of Civic Technology Initiatives for Joint Venture Silicon Valley. The photos on this slide here kind of illustrate sort of what we're talking about, and so this is a proposal to install wireless telecommunication facilities on our streetlight poles. This is an example of what that would look like. The main components are the construction of an antenna at the top of the pole and then other equipment at about the midpoint on the streetlight pole. And so specifically the proposed actions that are recommended here is approval of a master license agreement form for the installation of this equipment. And what you're proposing, what we're recommending you approve is a standardized form that would be applied to all companies sort of across the board. And the purpose of this is to provide some consistency in terms of how we're managing and regulating this particular activity. And then the city manager would be authorized to execute the specific agreements consistent with the form. What this will do is enable private investment by wireless communication companies, and there are 7 entities that we have been working with to develop this agreement form. There are Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, Mobility, Crown Castle, and Extenet. It's noted that the last 3 companies generally provide the infrastructure and then may lease it to other service providers. The other thing that this will do is enhance existing 4G services and accommodate for future 5G or 5th generation services. We're also recommending that you establish an administrative fee to enable cost recovery for our permitting and administrating costs associated with this. So as we've looked at this, kind of the key purposes and goals that we've considered is, one, to accommodate the public demand for wireless data communications. This is related to business, personal use, and public use. And as I'm sure we're all aware that there's just a lot more opportunities and a lot more demand and interest in communicating with mobile devices and using that infrastructure. We're also looking at supporting the infrastructure needs that are part of Fremont's innovation economy. And so companies that are located here value this kind of communication, as we're a center for innovation. This will certainly retain and attract companies that are interested in being innovators in this space. And as the council is aware, we also have our own Fremont Smart City Plan, and many of these things related to advanced transportation, as well as public safety services and things. Many of these things that we want to do in our Smart City Plan are reliant upon wireless communications. As we've looked at this, we want to make sure that we're protecting the community's interests with regards to aesthetics, health, and transparency. The caveat here is to the extent allowed by law. We don't have authority to regulate these things, so we have to comply primarily with federal regulations, but we want to sort of best utilize those regulations to provide the greatest protection and benefit that we can for our community. We are expecting that there is going to be a lot of activity in this space if we move forward in this direction. And so we're conscious about the impacts that it has on our administrative services. So we're looking at an efficient process, one that manages the demands on city staff time. As council is aware, we do have a very lean staff, and so we're looking at a system that we can manage with our resources. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we do need to comply with federal regulations, but we do recognize that there has been a lot of new regulation made in this space, and so the agreement form that we're recommending provides the protection for us that if rules change, and particularly if they change to the benefit of cities or Fremont, that we have the ability to reopen clauses in the agreement to be able to take advantage of regulatory changes that we see that are in our favor. All right, this chart here shows the growth in demand for wireless infrastructure. If you just look at the last 5 years, the demand for this has doubled. And if you look ahead at the next 5 years, it's going to double again. And so this is something that is increasing on kind of a logarithmic scale. A lot of the demand is driven by consumer interest in wireless communications, but there is also a significant industrial application for this, which is part of the demand curve. I want to touch a little bit on the regulatory environment. So wireless communications are considered a utility, and communication companies have the right to use our public street right-of-way. So this is very similar to water, electricity, gas, phone, and cable. These facilities are within our right-of-way. Some of them are on poles overhead, some in the ground. While it's our street, we do need to accommodate them, and we can't reasonably deny any access to utility companies for them to provide their service. Very significantly, there was a recent Federal Communications Commission ruling in September of 2018. The intent of the ruling was really to streamline the deployment of wireless infrastructure, and what it did was strictly limit some of the things that cities can do in terms of regulating the installation of wireless infrastructure. So one of the things in there is that essentially cities need to accommodate this, and we can do it in two ways. One is we can accommodate them within our existing pole infrastructure, like streetlights, or the companies have the ability to come in and put in a new set of poles to accommodate their equipment. What we're recommending is we think it's better for our street right-of-way to not have the clutter of a lot of different poles, and so the idea of finding a way to use our existing streetlight infrastructure we think is in our interest. If cities do allow their streetlight poles to be used, FCC has capped the amount of charge that the cities can impose for rental of the streetlight poles, which is capped at $270 per pole per year. So that's sort of a rental fee. And then there's a limit in terms of the initial fee, or call it the administrative fee to process things. So they say, it can't be more than $100 unless you can provide evidence that the cost of your process is more than that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. The most controversial part of the ruling has really been on the limitation of the fees. There have been many cities that have partnered with wireless companies, and so prior to this ruling, cities were receiving several thousands of dollars per pole per year. And so a lot of the big concern was that this strictly limited the amount that cities could charge. Again, kind of the purpose of the ruling is to create some consistency in rules so that every city didn't have a different set of rules, and the purpose at the national level was to try to find a way to facilitate deploying this infrastructure within our country. So I want to touch upon some of the actions that are being taken in other cities, and so this is something that's been active for a good 5 years. Small cell infrastructure is already in place in most of the large U.S. cities, New York City, L.A., Chicago, places with a lot of activity like Las Vegas and Orlando. And there have been cities that have actively courted the industry to bring this infrastructure to their communities because they saw it as something that was important to their economy and their ability to be a city of innovation. So cities like Kansas City, Phoenix, and Pittsburgh have also pursued this. Within Northern California, you can see the cities here in Silicon Valley. So this infrastructure has been in San Francisco for more than 5 years. Sacramento actively courted companies to install equipment in their city. It's in San Jose, it's in Oakland, Palo Alto, and Cupertino. If you look at this list, Fremont's actually the largest city in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley that does not have small cell infrastructure yet. The challenge to the FCC ruling has been led by San Jose and San Francisco, and generally the big thing that they've been concerned with was the limitation on fees. San Francisco had agreements where they were receiving $4,000 per year per pole. So the FCC number is $270, so that's obviously a big difference. San Jose had agreements with $2,500, and one of the things San Jose was interested in is that they would invest the money that they received from the lease agreements and then put it into addressing deficiencies in broadband infrastructure in some of their poorer communities. And so they've been concerned about sort of the limits on trying to bridge the digital divide that they have in their community. There have been some cities that more recently that have put in place a ban that we don't want this in our community. From what we understand, they've mostly been in Marin County, certainly not places that are sort of hotbeds of technology and innovation, but there is, communities that are taking that route. Clearly, that's in violation of the FCC rulings, and sort of what the legal ramifications of that are still to be seen. So getting into kind of the terms of the proposed MLA, we have put in restrictions, so we do have some ability to reasonably regulate sort of based on location and aesthetics. And so our proposal would not allow these to be on decorative streetlight poles, which are kind of an important part of the streetscape, or in areas where we have historic resources. Obviously, wireless equipment doesn't really comply with the look and feel of what we want to have around our historic properties. The term of the agreements would be for 10 years with 2 5-year options to extend. We are using sort of the maximum allowed rental rate of $270 with a 3% annual escalation clause. Now, the FCC ruling said, cities should not charge more than $100, but you can if you provide justification of doing more than that. And so we've looked at this very closely in terms of what we think the actual time is to process the permits, and have come up with a calculation of $400 as an administrative fee. This would also be escalated over time. And so this has been something that's been agreed to with the companies that we've been working with. As I mentioned, there is a clause to reopen the agreement terms if the rulings change. and say, so for example, if the 270 rate got raised, we would have the ability to go back in and renegotiate that cost. I know there are members of the community that have, concerns about sort of the health aspects of it. This is not something that we regulate, but we can require that for the installations that the service providers provide proof that their equipment is in compliance with the adopted health regulations. So that's something that we've put in there as well. So really a kind of a key thing is what this is going to look like, and that's been a source of a lot of concern, and there's actually been a number of very bad examples of how this has been installed to date. The picture on the right is an example of how you do this in an ugly way. So our requirements, we feel sort of very strict design standards. They are ones that the industry can comply with and we think are representative of sort of the best practices. Probably a good thing of not being an early adopter is that you get the benefits of, better equipment and more streamlined things. And so what you see in the illustration here with the equipment having a color that matches the color of the existing pole. It's attractive. It has a compact appearance. There's some guidelines is that the equipment should not extend more than 4 inches from the pole and no exposed wiring. And so we think that this is a solution that sort of blends in with our streetscape environment. And so these are standards that we've put in place. We expect, this is an issue of interest to the community, and so we've taken steps to let the community know that we're contemplating the consideration of these agreements. And so with our latest newsletter that was distributed to every resident in Fremont, the cover story was on small cells on city streetlight poles. This has been on the city's webpage as sort of the leading banner item. We have a website where people can get information, and we address frequently asked questions. And then we've also done social media notices in several cycles for more than a month now. And so we've made a concerted effort to make sure the public is aware of us considering this. Something else that we're planning to do, we don't have any permits that we're processing now. The first step is to have the master agreements. But if and when this is moved forward, we're committed to having a transparent process where public can get information about what is being proposed and what's already installed. And so this is an example that we like, and we plan to do something similar to this, where we have on our website public information about every pole location in which an application has been submitted, so something's being contemplated at that location, who is the service provider, whether it's Verizon, AT&T, or another company, and then also locations that have actually been completed and installed. And then within this GIS map, you can click on the dot, and then it'll open up a database of information. And so this would be the location that the compliance reports would be located. So somebody could look up and see, how the location tested and its compliance with regulations. So this is something that we're planning to implement as part of the process. We're really sort of grateful to have Joint Venture Silicon Valley, as Council knows, as a resource to assist us with this. So Joint Venture Silicon Valley is an effort to collaborate between the public sector, industry, and education, and address issues and challenges of things that affect our Silicon Valley community. And so David has been the lead person on their wireless initiative and has managed a regional steering committee that has included a variety of folks looking at this from all the different perspectives. They have put out a handbook. We have a link to that handbook as part of our staff report. They have a website. And because there's been a lot of, I guess, there have been concerns from the community about things of aesthetics and health and safety, and is this going to impact property values, there's a link that we include in our staff report to a handful of articles and resources that provide information on these different topics. And so that's available to you as a council, to the community, and David's happy to answer any questions that you may have in that regard. And so last, I just want to just acknowledge again the staff support team that we have here. So in addition to the four of us up here at the table, Christina Briggs is here from Economic Development. So if you have any questions about the importance of this to our economy, Sandy Taylor is here from Information Technology to address any questions on how this fits into kind of our municipal technology program. And then I also want to acknowledge we do have folks here that are monitoring this item from Verizon and AT&T. I don't believe they're planning to issue speaker cards. I think they're hoping that this gets approved. And they're available here as a resource as well. So if council has any questions for industry representatives, they've indicated the willingness to come up and help answer any questions. And so with that, that concludes our presentation. Be happy to take questions and participate with you in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at this time, we'll turn it over for the council for clarifying questions. Councilmember Xiao.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have just two questions. First of all, I just want to confirm that all those 7 major service providers were going to share the antennas and equipment on one single pole. So you don't have like multiple brands of equipment, like one belongs to AT&T, the other one belongs to Verizon, and then they're like kind of like clinging on to the single pole. So they're all shared, correct?
They would not be shared. And so the individual service, so we have 16,000 streetlight poles in the city of Fremont. So they would each be seeking permits for a particular pole, and so one pole may be Verizon, another AT&T, and so they will be separated.
Okay.
So you won't have like 7 pieces of equipment on one pole, but the equipment isn't something that they can share between the different companies.
I see. Well, that's good for the city because then we can generate revenue for from all those poles from different service providers. The second question is like at this stage, what is your estimate of the impact? How many poles are we going to license out or rent out?
So it's kind of hard to say. It's certainly going to be interest and market driven among the different companies, and then what the demand is. But as we indicated in the staff report, I think we're anticipating in the first year something probably 40 to 80 range. So I would say I think sort of it could be so probably more likely on the higher end of that range is what.
Okay, so you're talking about like 80 out of 16,000.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Just want to put it in the perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Next is Councilmember Bacon for clarifying questions.
Thank you. So you mentioned the cities of the 3 Marin County cities that have done the 5G bands. Could you give an overview of what are the complaints, or why are these cities? Why do they have rationale for what they
familiar with
these
that?
bands?
Yeah.
Councilmember Bacon, I'm happy to address that. So Marin County has, I've been working in wireless for a good portion of my career. Marin County was where I started back in the early days with the flip phone and the brick phone, and It was hard to do cellular back then. There's always been a challenge in Northern California, north of the Golden Gate Bridge. Primarily, I mean, there are a variety of different reasons why I think that occurs, but their concerns are largely around health issues. And there is a person that operates out of the Marin Petaluma area who's pretty active in whipping up a lot of those concerns. And I think that those cities have been swayed by those perspectives. And I want to clarify that it's usually around the intersection where the siting is going to be in residential. And so that seems to be the biggest concern. But also in natural areas, we had some trouble getting sites up on Mount Tam, for example, back in the 90s.
Okay. So what are the ramifications? Is it basically just if a cell provider says, no, we really want a tower in one of those cities, they would basically need to do some kind of lawsuit to...
I'd hesitate to offer legal advice as I'm not a lawyer, but
Okay.
I would
Got it.
say that they are definitely putting themselves in jeopardy of being sued.
Okay.
Probably the thing that prevents that is that there's so much building going on elsewhere that it's just not worth the effort
That they can
right
go
now.
elsewhere until they really want to locate there.
If they really wanted to go there, then that would be the remedy that they would likely use. But I'm not speaking for them, nor am I making legal advice.
Okay. Yes, and I know you mentioned the health. We are getting a number of comments from members of the public about that.
Sure.
As far as the locations, would they be more in residential neighborhoods or mainly on, if we're talking about rolling it out in Fremont? Is it?
Or- Yeah, so cellular infrastructure, specifically the small cell technology, is used for capacity and augmentation of existing networks. It's not used to create coverage; it's used to improve coverage. It's used to improve capacity. It's used to improve speeds. So you do, because they are low power, you do have to put them closer to people. But because they are low power, they're also lower impact, much lower than the FCC guidelines for health.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I mean, I would just add, generally, it's the location is driven by where the need is. And so generally that there's kind of more orientation to area where there's high density, more activity. And so those are the areas where, the coverage is most needed. And so we would expect it to be more on, the major streets, the higher density areas of Fremont, and not in sort of the lower density suburban areas.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Solwan.
Thank you. So how did you decide on the 10-year lease plan? Like why 10-year versus some of the others?
Originally, we went with the 10-year because we had a financing agreement that used the light poles as to finance the LED light, and that was going to be up in roughly 10 years when we started negotiating this, and so that's why we came up with the 10-year period.
Okay. And how do you balance, like, because we have current defined carriers now, but maybe we may have new carriers in the future. So how do you balance allowing the ones that are already here, ready to go, and then some new ones that come forward in the future? How do you preserve some of these poles for them?
So one of the things that the MLA has written into it is if they do not build their facility, if they don't, once they get the pole license agreement for that pole, they have 30 days to come and apply for the regulatory approvals, the design review permit, and the encroachment permit. And then once those are issued, they have 180 days to actually build the infrastructure on the pole. If they do not meet those deadlines, the pole license is terminated. So another carrier can come in and use that pole. But every carrier that wants to use our poles will have to sign an MLA. And we're leaving it open to anybody who wants to sign one right now, and it's going to be on a first-come, first-served basis for the poles.
Okay. Are there opportunities for folks in the community or folks that are interested to get more involved? Is there any opportunities for them to get involved in this or have some sort of stakeholder?
I think it would just address it from a regulatory environment. I mean, there really isn't, we basically, I mean, there's direction for cities to accommodate this. And so the benefit of the master license agreement, it creates sort of an orderly, consistent, level playing field process. So it isn't really something that, it's up to, community choice or debate in terms of where they go and, how they get accommodated.
And, since we're talking about business, I mean, I'd like to hear the business pitch for why 5G is important for our city. I don't know if you want to make that or if you want to get Christina, but it'd be nice to hear that for the benefit of the folks at home and people trying to understand what 5G does.
Sure, if you could use the one at the dais. Thank you.
Is it on? Hi, Christina Briggs, Economic Development Director. I'm happy to address the business or economic development perspective with this issue. Primarily, I see sort of two different issues. One is as the national economy moves toward 5G broadly, we think about Fremont in terms of both regional competitiveness, but also competitiveness with other regions, beyond the Bay Area or California for that matter. But the other more specific or more unique issue for Fremont, perhaps, is the set of industries that we do have here. You've heard me talk a lot about Internet of Things. This is, a broad set of industry that is really sort of playing out in Fremont because this is a hardware-based economy. These are software and connected hardware devices. These are connected with wireless communication. And so to the extent that that industry wants to proliferate in a place like Fremont, it is going to depend on an environment that has 5G capabilities. So those are two of what I consider the most important sort of business cases for adopting something like this.
Very nice. Thank you.
Any other questions from Raj before I move on? Okay, great. Thank you. Next, Councilmember Kang.
Thank you, Mayor. So to follow up Councilmember Solwan's question, so we have 15,500 poles. Is that right? In the city?
Yeah, approximately 16,000 streetlight poles.
Okay, all right. And so how many, are we setting a number, like how many are we going to allow in a period of time so that, Councilman Solwan said earlier, that we could leave space for, other providers and...
I think that, so it is first come, first serve, and so it's really going to be sort of market demand and, company interest in delivering it. But I think if you look at just sort of the scale of, to provide sort of the wireless coverage, for our community with multiple service providers, there is enough streetlight pole opportunity that I don't think we're realistically looking at some scarcity of not enough poles being out there.
Got it. Okay. Because we're charging about $370 or $365 for each pole per year.
$270.
Oh, $270 per year. So if one company wants to lease like 1,000 poles, then it's like $270K, which is probably not, a lot for the big companies. And would that take up, too many?
Well, I think it's the kind of comes down to is sort of what's the level of spacing of coverage that you need in order to provide the service for the area. And so, I just kind of an example is I think the city of San Jose, which, is like 4 times larger than Fremont. I mean, they have been deploying wireless infrastructure in that city. I think they have a total of 600 poles with wireless equipment.
Got it.
So
all right.
We're, I
plenty
think it's
to go around.
not likely, certainly in the near term, that we'd be looking at, more than 1,000 poles having this equipment on it. So that's a relatively small percentage of the overall poles.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? Seeing none, can we have some comments now at this time? And any motions to vote? No votes, just informational? I'm sorry, is there any speaker cards? That's what I was asking. Okay, great. Thank you. Councilmember Jones.
I'm ready for a motion. If there are no other comments, I'll move to approve staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Jones and seconded by Councilmember Solwan. Please vote. And the motion carries unanimously. So